the atomic bomb, and one he mentions both.
Which one went on the radio?
The first one was the one that he mentions, the atomic bomb.
And not the Russian.
Right.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned chapter 4. I'd be interested in you briefly characterizing the other 7 chapters, just what they are, but also a question. You have finished a book, but is the series finished? And is chapter 10, have you locked picture, or are you leaving it open until a certain time?
Question? I'm sorry, the question is, could Oliver perhaps briefly, and Peter, talk about the other chapters, the other 7 chapters, and give us an outline of where this series is going?
Just briefly say that picture is being locked on 9 and 10 in final text. It's not that we're waiting for the election, because I think we're into a really big picture. It's really about pure work, effort, and of course these drafts are redone constantly. We're constantly checking ourselves, and there's a lot of fact-checking going on. So 9 and 10 are still, and that's the Bush and Obama years, yes, and that we're doing now. Peter will address your other 6 chapters.
What we do is we take it all the way up to the present, up to today. We're constantly adding. We're talking about drones. We're talking about the Asia pivot. As you might know, Hillary Clinton wrote an article in Foreign Policy magazine this year, in which it's titled America's Pacific Century, where we're talking about our pivot to Asia, which is our containment policy toward China, and is a policy that's involved with shifting our fleet from 50-50 Pacific Atlantic to 60% now in Asia, that we're militarizing. We've got these military agreements. We're setting up new bases in that region. And we've got, as Chalmers Johnson said, an empire of bases. The United States, we don't know how to count them because they're defined differently. We might have 1,000 bases. How many bases does China, our main antagonist, have now? They just got their first base. So this is what we're up against. And so we're trying to take this story about American militarism and the wars, as Katrina was saying, right up to the present. So we deal in depth with Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're telling aspects of those wars that the public doesn't know. And we're discussing Obama, and Obama is for us an interesting case study because he shows how difficult it is for somebody that intelligent, with a certain kind of decency and morality, how difficult it is for even Obama to break with these patterns that we're seeing. So in some ways we're critical of Obama, not in the same way we'd be critical of Romney, which is a whole other nightmare. but the limitations on somebody like Obama, who hopefully would like to make changes, and he was warned about these things. He met with historians when he first took office, and they went around and they all said to him, the one thing you can't do is get involved in Afghanistan. That's the biggest mistake you can make. And of course, with Robert Gates and Hillary Clinton, you look at the people who surround themselves with Jones, it's not surprising, given his advisors on the Reubenites on domestic policy and economic policy, and the Clintonites and Gates, even worse, on foreign policy. So we take it up to the president.
Yes, ma'am, right here.
I was wondering, I've been asking around people here in America about Smedley Butler, and I haven't met a single person, including history teachers. I have heard of him. I've traveled also to Chicago, and I couldn't see the general, the most decorated general, who wrote War is a Racket. So I was wondering, also in Hollywood, I've never seen a film about Smedley Butler, not that I'm aware of.
How many people have heard of Smedley Butler? Raise your hand.
I've seen that segment. I knew of it, but
I was wondering if you are planning on doing something, if you do, I would work for free on the research.
We're 2 years over budget and 2 years over our due date. We did 2 chapters about 1900 and 1920 to 1940. Butler was very much a hero, and those 2 chapters are right now on footnotes because of time and energy. But he was a great. He died in 1939, and he was an interesting character.
We had all that about Butler, and we had about his becoming such a fierce opponent of warfare. We had about his critique of the U.S. policy in Latin America. We also had about his critique of the businessman's plot in 1934, 1935. Stories that very, very few Americans know about. We've got great information. It's in the book. And hopefully we'll get to release those other 2 episodes with the box set, if we can.
Yeah, thank you so much for a very provocative series. It's obviously going to raise hell around the country. And I wanted to push back on the 3rd segment and the 2nd segment. The 2nd segment, I think, doesn't do justice to the complexities of the Polish question the way you frame it in there, because you sort of ignore from 39 to 42 to the death of Sikorsky, and then started with this comment of Stalin saying the terror of the Poles. Yet we're not, the sort of ambiguity of what occurs in the Allies is sort of lost to that. So we sort of get the impression that when he imposes the Lublin government, well, that's his point of view, right on. He has to do it because he perceives them as terrorists. First critique. Second critique, in the 3rd segment, you don't include the coup that the Japanese military planned between Hiroshima and Nagasaki to overthrow the government because they didn't want peace. And that, of course, is a fact, not an interpretation. So I just wanted you to respond to those 2. It's a great piece. It's going to cause tremendous debate. And Doug and Jonathan saying how it's good to frame and rethink what's been going on for the past 15 years. You're going to accomplish that.
Everybody heard that? Questions about, first, the whole Polish question. In the film, it basically talks about Stalin establishing the government in Lublin, and doesn't really go into the events before that, 39 to 42, and why that was a reaction to that. And the second, Jim?
Well, the coup. There was a coup attempt between Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In that episode, I covered the Enola Gay controversy for a long time, and we would have had this debate if that exhibit had been allowed to have been continued. We knew politically it couldn't happen. We would have had a long time ago. But I just wonder, you know, we could push back on that for a million years, and that's great. You're going to do it with this film.
There was a faction, the Supreme War Council was split 3-3.
Well, the chief of staff.
The Japanese Supreme War Council was split 3-3, and which is why Emperor Hirohito had to intervene to break the split. Anami and Umezu wanted to fight on to the end. They were not going to surrender. They thought 100 million should die together. However, the point that Jonathan was making, the Japanese strategy for getting better surrender terms was based on a couple things. One was their Ketsugo strategy, their military strategy, and that called for welcoming an American invasion so they could inflict as much damage as they could on the American invaders and get better surrender terms that way. Their other way to get better surrender terms was to try to get the Russians to intervene on their behalf, to offer concessions to the Soviet Union, get the Soviet Union to get them better surrender terms. When the Soviets invaded, it's important to understand, the Soviet invasion undermined both of those strategies. It meant now they couldn't get the Soviets to mediate and get better surrender terms, and they couldn't, and militarily, their military strategy was now totally bankrupt also. So the leadership understood at that point, most of the leaders, some wanted to fight to the end, and they were fanatics, yeah. There was a faction there. They did try to stage a coup. The coup was defeated easily. It was not a serious coup. It was mostly junior officers who were involved in it. And it was Anami and Umezu who actually put it down. Then Anami goes and commits suicide, as they knew he would. So yes, there was still a lot of opposition to even surrender at that point.
The Polish issue.
Yeah, I was wondering if Katerina would like to weigh in on that idea of the Polish issue in terms of with Russia, with Stalin, and so on.
One comment there, which is that when the Soviets came into Poland in 1944, This wasn't the first time they've been important. Even as the Soviet Union, not to speak of Russia before that, I think he was important. But in '39, as the Lenin and Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, they had quietly, sort of somewhat quietly, except it was clear, had occupied half of Poland before and imposed an incredibly brutal and ruthless regime, far more brutal than what was imposed in 1945. And so, in a certain sense, anybody sitting around expecting treatment and life from them upon entering Poland is kidding themselves drastically. And now, I think one interesting question, and maybe someone has the answer to, I was actually told during the movie about it, was to what extent American policymakers did have such a fantasy and imagined that the deal that they had struck with Stalin was going to actually lead to something that looked like parliamentary democracy and all the rest. If they did, they were kidding themselves very badly and should have known it in the light of history.
Okay. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'm giving a high five now. Oliver Stone, Chief Justice.